Greetings, programs, and welcome to another episode of Thumb Wars Presents Blistered Reviews. I'm your host, Sean Crudefelt, and today I'll be taking a look at two games based on popular franchises, namely Angry Birds Epic and Transformers Rise of the Dark Spark. One of these titles is an utter piece of crap, and the other is a well-done adventure that does the brand proud. Which is which? The answers might just surprise you. Except it totally won't.
For every force in the universe, there is an equal and an opposite. For every hero, a villain. And for every victory, defeat.
In many ways, Transformers Rise of the Dark Spark is the Transformers version of last year's Batman Arkham Origins. Like Origins, Dark Spark featured a new developer stepping in to continue a sub-series that was created by a different developer who had previously produced two entries for said sub-series, thus leaving a strong mark on the franchise as a whole. The key difference between the two games is this. If Batman Arkham Origins was like a professional cover band doing a credible job of aping the original, then Dark Spark is that amateur high school garage band who's lucky if they even hit 5 notes in a row correctly. This is the kind of game that has long given licensed titles their bad reputations, and it even fails to properly execute its big supposed central concept to boot. Rise of the Dark Spark was pitched as a game that would bring the version of the Transformers introduced in the Michael Bay films together with the version established by the popular Cybertron games of recent years. And while I've only ever had a middling tolerance for the Bayformers at best, my natural love of all things crossover did lead me to being at least somewhat excited to dig into Dark Spark's main story campaign. However, as it turns out, Activision and developer Edge of Reality have in fact sold gamers a load of bull, and for that reason alone, this game deserves nothing but mocking and scorn. In point of fact, the two cast of characters featured in Dark Spark never actually meet or directly interact, and instead, the game plays out like half of a movie adaptation of Age of Extinction that's been shoved together with the warmed-over remains of discarded and unmade Fall of Cybertron levels. The game's piss-poor excuse for a story is supposed to operate as both a prequel to Fall and a sequel to Extinction, despite the presence of enemy bots who were very clearly killed during the latter. But frankly, what scant narrative elements are present in the game adds little to the overall experience. More familiar faces like Optimus and Megatron go through their expected shtick for the umpteenth time, while similarly, characters given a focus in the two Cybertron games are trotted back out to basically just repeat or reference occurrences from those games. Meanwhile, the movie-based portion of Dark Spark can't even be bothered to include characters from the movie it's supposedly meant to tie into, like Galvatron or the other Dinobots beyond Grimlock. Ultimately, the story of Rise of the Dark Spark comes off like half-assed fanfiction and represents perhaps the game's biggest missed opportunity. Which is not to say the other elements of this title fare any better when all is said and done. If Dark Spark's story feels like a retread of what's come before, then the same goes double for its gameplay. Put simply, there is not a single original idea in Dark Spark, and even worse, the game does not even manage to at least capture the essence of what made the Cybertron titles so enjoyable. Poor level design filled with too many cramped spaces and empty hallways, combined with gameplay sections that feel like they were simply cut and paste directly from past titles, helps blunt the effectiveness of Dark Spark's gameplay. Batman Arkham Origins may have had its problems, but at least it felt like the developers put enough effort into the game for it to be a proper addition to the Arkham sub-series. Furthermore, Dark Spark's attempts at set-piece moments completely underwhelmed, especially since should-be high points like controlling the giant combiner Bruticus or everyone's favorite Dinobot Grimlock ultimately come off as just pale imitations of similar moments from previous titles. Also, the game's few half-hearted boss battles barely qualify as such, with the requisite big bout between Megatron and Optimus in particular feeling like a bad joke. The game even has the gall to reuse the same city-based map twice, with the only real difference being the time of day and the bot players are controlling. In point of fact, the game really only has about 8 distinct levels spread across 14 chapters, and if that doesn't speak to either laziness or a lack of proper resources, I don't know what does. The overall campaign in the game simply lacks any spark, no pun intended, and all too often comes across like just another bad Gears of War clone, something the Cybertron games managed to avoid adroitly time and time again. At this point, it will likely come as little surprise that Darkspark's visuals are no more impressive than any other part of the game, and indeed, the title features everything from frequent poor textures to endless repetition of the same few character models for enemies. The game also suffers from long load times, and even semi-frequent occurrences of loading mid-level that literally pauses the action midstream for a minute or more until it's done. Because there's nothing like being frozen during a hectic battle, mid-shot, while you wait for the game to load to completely kill any and all sense of momentum. Orally, the game's voice cast, led by the always able Peter Cullen, do their best, but the effort of making Darkspark sound like a proper Transformers game is ultimately wasted since it barely looks or plays like one as well. Overall, fans of the franchise and third-person shooters alike can and should find better games to scratch their itch, thanks to Transformers Rise of the Darkspark being just another in a long line of lazy licensed games from Activision. One can only hope this is not how the previously excellent Cybertron subseries will ultimately end up going out. Score, 4 out of 10, below average. Recommendation, avoid it.
It all started a long time ago, in a world that was completely made up. A fantasy piggy island, where silly costumes were fashionable, and weapons were, how to put it, a bit different. Enter a new breed of hero in a game that's truly epic.
While portions of the hardcore gaming set tend to look down their noses at the Angry Birds series, there's no denying that creator and publisher Rovio Entertainment have generally managed to produce well-made, if at times highly derivative, titles time and time again. And while I'm not the biggest Angry Birds fan on the face of the planet, I'd be lying if I didn't admit I've enjoyed my fair share of bird versus pig action over the years, particularly when lightsabers have also been involved. That being said, I did feel Go, which marked the series' first serious attempt to break out of the usual formula by indulging in kart racing antics, fell rather short of previous series highs, thanks in no small part to an overabundance of pay elements, particularly the always dreaded energy system. So I approached the newest Angry Birds release, Angry Birds Epic, with more than a little hesitation, but thankfully I'm happy to say that Rovio has indeed appeared to have learned from their past mistakes. Much like Go before it, Angry Birds Epic once again departs from the standard AB formula, and instead presents players with a full-on classic turn-based RPG adventure. The game's setup, as always, involves those foolish pigs stealing the birds' hard-laid eggs, and our familiar cast of avians setting out to get them back by laying the smackdown on any and all porcine that get in their way. Only this time, instead of relying on physics and an ability to use a virtual slingshot, players will instead have to form a team of 3 birds, travel across a Super Mario World-esque field map, find and craft new items, armor, and weapons, and make use of a wide variety of attacks and special abilities in turn-based battles in order to overcome the piggy hordes. Players will eventually be able to select from 5 main birds, each with their own primary class. Red is the all-around warrior, yellow is the mage, pink is the healer, etc., that can then be tweaked further by finding or crafting new armor. Each bird has a main attack, special ability, and super ability, with the last only being usable once a special meter is filled, and while a bird's super remains the same regardless of their current class, their regular attacks and abilities can vary wildly. So, for example, the pink bird's cleric armor causes her main attack to also heal her teammates for 20% of the damage done, while her special ability creates a 3-turn shield around herself and her teammates that will automatically heal all birds by 15% of any damage done to any one of them at any time. Meanwhile, Pink's druid armor causes her regular attack to do less damage, but also inflicts a powerful damage per turn effect on an enemy that will last 3 turns, while her special ability heals a chosen target by a significant amount and the rest of the team by a lesser amount. Add in the fact that each bird can eventually have 5 different classes at their disposal, and the strategic possibilities inherent in Epic should be clear. Players will need to make use of every advantage they can get, because Angry Birds Epic is not a game inclined to pull any punches, especially once players have beaten the game's first major boss an hour or so in. Enemies in Epic feature just as much diversity as the player characters, and they can have passive skills such as immunity to effects like damage over time, or particularly strong or weak attacks, and active abilities like stunning birds or causing all enemies to target a specific bird. Furthermore, battles can sometimes last as many as 5 rounds, with each round bringing on a new set of foes and without restoring the bird's health in between. These fights will force players to not only focus on the enemies at hand, but also stay prepared for the fights to come. In order to keep up with their foes, players will need to make use of an extensive crafting system to forge new weapons, and helpful consumables like a healing potion and a piece of cake that charges up the player's super attack meter. Of course, said crafting will require players to constantly be on the hunt for materials needed to make them, and which can be acquired via battle, special chests on the field map, or even in some cases, purchased using in-game and real-world currencies. Now, I can practically hear some of you cringing at the mention of potential required in-app purchases, but I want to make it clear that it's not required to do so in order to progress in Epic. Players can gather all the crafting material they need by spending some time grinding away against foes, and frankly, they'll need to do so regardless to keep leveling the birds up so they can match their constantly more and more powerful foes. In this regards, Epic very much follows in the footsteps of old-school RPGs, but fortunately, returning to beaten levels causes new enemies to appear, and combat in general is complex and engaging enough to help keep grinding when necessary from being too much of a chore. Furthermore, the complete lack of any kind of energy system helps keep Epic on the right side of the free-to-play mobile game line. Throw in the typical strong cartoony visuals and audio that's come to be the norm for a Rovio game, and what you have is a mobile RPG that could stand shoulder to shoulder with the best such games available on mobile platforms. While Epic does still include elements that encourage players to link to Facebook or offer some shortcuts for those with cash to spend, these aspects of the game are firmly kept optional, and players can easily choose to ignore them completely if they so desire. It seems fairly clear that the developers responsible for Epic, namely Chimera Entertainment, must be big RPG fans in their own right, because they've produced a title that is accessible to newcomers to the genre, while still having enough complexity to appeal to the hardcore fans as well. Overall, Angry Birds Epic is anything but a cheap cash-in, and both fans of the franchise and RPGs in general owe it to themselves to at least give the game a try, especially since doing so will cost them nothing. Score, 8 out of 10, awesome. Recommendation, buy it now. Okay, and that's going to wrap up today's episode. I will be out of town next week through the 5th, so new episodes from me of either Thumb Wars or Blistered Reviews may or may not happen. I'm going to do my best to try and get something up, but depending on situations beyond my control, that may not be possible. If not, I'll see you again after the 5th, with reviews of games such as Valiant Hearts and One Piece Unlimited World Red, and new Thumb Wars dealing with topics such as the top 5 replacements for Batman in video games. This is Sean Cronenfeld for Thumb Wars and That Guy with the Glasses, wishing you happy gaming, and as always, thanks for watching.